Bonjour, I'm Tom Hokinson, a faculty member here at Red Lake Nation College on the shores of beautiful Red Lake in northern Minnesota. Today, September 17th, 2020, is Constitution and Citizenship Day. It's a day that we will look briefly at the U.S. Constitution, citizenship, and also the Red Lake Nation Constitution. I'll be joined later by former Chairman Floyd Buck Jourdain, who will talk about that. Constitution Day, or what we call Constitution Day, wasn't always named that. It dates back to 1939 when William Randolph Hearst, the famous businessman in the area of owning newspapers, decided that we should have a day called I Am an American Day. It's important to remember what was going on in 1939. It was a time of rising nationalism, Germans and other groups. And it was thought that it would be very important to have a day set aside for Americans to be recognized and to focus on our Constitution. He had an advantage in that he owned newspapers across the country, and he could say anything he wanted in them. So he advertised this idea, and a year later, in 1940, this day was created. And I Am an American Day was originally in May. It was scheduled for the third Sunday in May, and that's when it started. And it continued on. In 1944, during the war, the U.S. government produced a film promoting it to have more and more people involved in it. In 1952, the name of it was changed from I Am an American Day, and it became Citizenship Day, and it was actually moved to September 17th. They chose September 17th because that was the day that the Constitution of the United States was signed in 1787. The U.S. Constitution is interesting. It is one of the major countries in the world. It is the oldest and shortest document that you will find. In fact, it's only 4,543 words long. It is a 4-page document, and you can actually go see the original. Since 1952, it's been housed in the National Archives building. So you can go there and you can see the actual document. A little history on the signing of the U.S. Constitution. One thing that's kind of interesting, and a lot of people don't know, is that our U.S. Constitution was not the first Constitution of the United States. The first Constitution of the United States was actually the Articles of Confederation, a document that at the time was so weak and so poorly put together that they decided that they had to basically tear it up and start over. And that weakness has kind of been a hallmark of the Constitution in the United States in terms of there's always been a fear in the United States of overly strong leadership. That's why that helps explain why we have checks and balances and why we have designed the Constitution the way it is. We did not want to have somebody rise to power and become another king. So at first they designed the Articles of Confederation. Like I said, it was so weak that the original one didn't even have a president in the United States. So a lot of people get the question wrong if you ask them, who was president of the United States in 1776 when we declared independence? The answer is there was no president of the United States at that time. It was only later that when the new Constitution was written that we actually had a president of the United States, and the first one, of course, was George Washington. The signing itself was in Philadelphia, the Constitutional Convention. The Constitutional Convention was very contentious. They were debating the form of government. This is where we had the Great Compromise, where it was decided to have the Senate states would have equal representation there, but the House would be, the representation would be based off the population of each state. That was one of the major stumbling blocks and one of the things that they had to get over to get the Constitution accepted by so many states. Only of the 42 delegates to the Constitutional Convention, 3 of them refused to sign, mainly because there was no Bill of Rights in the Constitution itself. Agreement was made that that would be the first thing that they would do if they passed the Constitution, would be to add the Bill of Rights, freedom of religion, right to bear arms, and so forth. Interesting enough, there was a wide range of ages. Of course, it was all men at this time who were signers of the Constitution, white men, with Ben Franklin being the oldest at age 82, and the youngest was only 26 years old. Constitution, as I mentioned before, was signed on September 17, 1787. James Madison took the major role in the Constitution, and he is considered the father of the U.S. Constitution. He was involved in all the meetings in it and really helped push it through. So we get to, what do people do on Constitution Day? Well, one of the things we do are things like this. We talk about the U.S. Constitution. In schools, there's often programs. At civic places, they have programs talking about the Constitution, and it's often pretty common to hand out copies of the U.S. Constitution to different groups, civic groups, and also to students in classrooms so that they can go through it. It's also very common to display the U.S. flag and fly the flag at your house or at office buildings. The second part of it is Constitution and Citizenship Day. Citizenship is recognized on the back half, and it's also a day to celebrate those who have just become citizens and the citizenship process. This is in the news a lot now. There's a lot of kind of anti-immigrant, anti-citizenship efforts in the country, but it is an important day for the country to have new citizens, new people come in and become citizens, and also for those families themselves. I have firsthand experience in this. My wife and I have been married for 28 years, and my wife is from Honduras. We got married in Honduras, came to the United States, and began the U.S. citizenship process for her. It's an arduous process. She had to work and learn English. She had to study U.S. history, learn about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, pass a test, and go through this whole process and then be sworn in as a citizen in St. Paul, Minnesota. It is a wonderful experience to go through. It's an accomplishment, and when you think about people coming from other countries to the United States, it's a dream for a lot of them, and it's a big deal. It is huge for them. It gives them a sense of meaning, a new identity as an American, and it is very special. On this day is a good day for you to perhaps take out a copy of the Constitution if you have one, or look it up online. Look at the different parts of it. Look at the Bill of Rights and see which parts of it really speak to you. This is a day to kind of reflect on all those things. But of course, it's not only the U.S. Constitution. Up here in northern Minnesota, I am on a reservation up here, and they have their own constitution. So in addition to the U.S. Constitution, Red Lake has its own constitution. And former Chairman Buck Jourdain will continue with the talk about their constitution and what it means to them. Thank you.
Bonjour, Nindinwe Magnaduk, Nijnishnabe Duk. Bejig Ninganigabo, Nishnikas. Usquagame was Agi Gani, and Donjuba. Bonjour, everybody. My name is Floyd Buck Jourdain, and I, here at the Red Lake Nation College, am the Director of Equity, Cultural Education, and Tribal Archives. And one of the things I'm talking about today is tribal governance and leadership and maybe some Red Lake history. And I also want to talk about, in sequence, how things evolved here in terms of leadership styles and how we, as Anishinaabe, part of the Ojibwe Algonquin Nation, have grown to be what we are now and how we govern in modern times, and then also some of the constitutional reform initiatives that have taken place here over the years. My background, I worked on the reservation for many years as an educator, a counselor, a student of culture, and just learning mostly from older people and being intuitive and listening. And one of the things that I did for many years was listen to people who were former tribal leaders and tribal council members or families of, because some of them had deceased over time. And I was really interested in that because leaving high school here in 1984, I graduated from Red Lake. I went to the University of Minnesota Duluth and became fascinated with political science. Why? I think it really was something I was interested in because I started getting into treaties. Larry Aiken was the head of the Indian Studies Department at UMD, and I learned a lot from him. And his classes were fascinating. And there was a good group of people over there that really kind of nudged us in the direction of tribal leadership. So working in the community here for many years, I started to gravitate more towards people who had backgrounds in that. Eventually, I got into tribal government, and I became the tribal chairman here at Red Lake in 2004, where I served for 10 years. And part of the my platform, and I still remember it very clearly in 2004, my campaign letter stressed the importance of tribal governance and constitutional reform. I've been studying at Bemidji State University under Kent Smith, who was the director of those programs at that particular time. So I started getting interested in tribal constitutions and American constitutions, and also looking at some of the ones in Central America, other tribes throughout the country. And one of the reasons why I was interested in that was I started to see a lot of problems in Indian country and their governments. Every 2 and 4 years, there seemed to be this perpetual cycle of one government in, one administration out. There was a lot of economic ruin. Trying to meet the needs of the Indians on Indian reservations was tough because tribes would borrow a ton of money, they would get businesses going, and then they would fail. And this was not only here at Red Lake, but it was all over Indian country. And so I was wondering, why is this happening? And it led me to the Harvard project on economic development in Indian country. And you can look it up as a study that followed various tribes throughout Indian country, and they said, well, which ones are doing really well and which ones keep repeating the same mistakes? And these two parallels, basically, the summary was that their constitutions were weak. They all go back to the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act mainly, and it was there was very little keeping the politics out of the business. And there was a lot of politics involved in everything. When a government controls every aspect of a tribal society, then it's a recipe for a disaster. So if they control every home, every budget, every job, every business, and a lot of times tribal council people don't make very good business people. There are diverse backgrounds that they have, and very few are actually well versed in tribal governance. And prior to coming into office, even less so. So they learn as they get there. And a lot of times we have a flawed sense of what a tribal leader should be. Historically here, as part of the Ojibwe Nation, as we migrated west, following our prophecies of the past Ojibways and our spiritual teachings, we arrived at this particular point. We had our old systems in place. We had the Madeo and societies as our spiritual and religious teachings. And we also used our clan systems as a guide to the blueprint of how we were supposed to live and be as Anishinaabe people. It was the answer to the age-old philosophical question, why are we here? What is our purpose? What are we supposed to do? In modern times, is it just to keep up with the Joneses, or have a better iPhone, or get as many Facebook likes as we can? We all had a purpose back then that contributed something to a communal society. Whether it was here we have the 7 clans. There are much more clans, Red Lake clans, but those are the 7 that are identified. And a lot of that has to go back to our old chief systems. But for instance, we had clans that were everybody went to in terms of leadership and guidance. There was others who were doctors and healers. There was others who were experts at the natural environment and foraging and harvesting. And there was others yet who were very, very spiritual people who were the guardians of our spiritual way of life. There were so many ways that our society together worked under those old chief systems. Well, actually, even before that, those were the guides that kept our Ojibwe nation strong. In 1918, we formulated a government. Here was a 1918 constitution, which was a hybrid of that old system plus modern government. And the tribal leader at the time, Jaganache, was Peter Graves, who was a very articulate and educated in both the Ojibwe language and then also modern education. And he emphasized education as the savior of, this is going to be the savior of our Indian people here. We have to know the outside world. We have to know education. We have to know what's going on, and we have to adapt to the modern times. This was in 1918. Under the 1918 Constitution, we had no districts. There was no such thing as Red Lake, Little Rock. The Constitution there had 2 executives, a chief executive, or the chairman and the secretary treasurer. And then those 7 chiefs appointed 5 people. So there was like 44 people on our tribal council. So you could see they used modern political structure along with some of our traditions and customs. And it worked well for 40 years. In 1934, the Indian Reorganization Act was passed that basically allowed tribes what the government said was their own empowerment. The ability to be able to district, the ability to determine your own membership, to develop corporations and to do business. And some theorize that the federal government did this also to secure a monopoly on Indian resources, because there was private interest coming into Indian country that, hey, you have all of this timber, you have all of these resources, you have grazing lands, you have oil, you have a lot of resources. Let us come in and help you extract these resources, and we will finance it, and we'll all get rich, we'll all make money. Well, the federal government said, no, we exclusively are the only ones who deal with these Indians. And so a lot of our people think this way, is that these constitutions were designed to put together a structure and a system in place where exclusively only the federal government could deal with Indian people. And there's language in there subject to the Secretary of the Interior's approval. And this was in the 1934 constitutions. And the constitutions were very vague, lacked a Bill of Rights. There's not a lot of accountability or descriptions of what government officials are really supposed to do. We adopted in 1958 the revised Constitution and bylaws. The old one went away. And after 1958, we started to see some of the things that the government suggested. Some of the old chiefs didn't want this new government, and there was others yet who did. there was a new generation coming up that wanted it, but for certain the federal government wanted it. And they influenced the Red Lake Band into adopting, even though per se it's not AIRA, it's basically the same template. You can take the 1958 revised Constitution and bylaws and compare it with other Ojibwe or Chippewa tribes in the United States, Michigan, North Dakota, and compare it, even other tribes, and lay them side by side, and they are virtually identical. So the 2013, and after Jaganache, Roger Jourdain was the tribal chairman. His name was Genu Guanayash, which means golden eagle flying all over in the sky. And so Jaganache was the head of the reservation for 40 years, and Roger for like over 30. In 2013 is when the band decided, to initiate the constitutional reform. So it took several years to implement this, figure out how we're going to go about it and how to do it and how to empower the people. It should never be a small group of people who fashion a government for, what we have 14,000 now. There always has to be community involvement. There always, every step of the way. So with the Constitutional Reform Initiative, that is the most crucial piece. Why change it? Do we have to change it? Is it suitable? Is there a cultural match? Does it really match who we are as Anishinaabe people? Because many of us agree that we're very horrible at sticking a round circle into a square peg. Does this Constitution really meet the needs of the Red Lake people? How does it reflect our cultural values? And does it bring forth some of those customs? What about the Ojibwe language? How about succession? Under this, the 1958, the chiefs were basically omitted. Under 1918, they were very powerful. They appointed the tribal officers of the Red Lake Band, and they held our reservation intact and closed, and they guarded our resources and our place in the world, our tribal sovereignty. After 1958, that changed. We went to elected governments where we have 4 districts now, and people compete over elected office, over resources, and basically who is going to control the resources and the power of the reservation. Unfortunately, there is no way to sugarcoat that. These tribal elections can be vicious and brutal, and you have good candidates and some bad, but they are happening under the 1958 for many, many years. You see political turmoil. There's things that happen that basically upended our government structure and continuity. So since 1958, it's hard to actually have continuity and stability under these constitutions. But that's what they were designed to do. And so as we move forward with a new constitutional reform initiative, these are some of the things that we have to think about, is not only what is the role of government, but how do we define it? What is a tribal leader? And what structure do we want to have here that is actually going to empower people and is actually going to reflect our culture? And how is this for generations to come going to serve the purposes of everybody, not just a select few? If we don't do that, we have special interest groups who will tailor this Constitution to their advantage. Well, my little group, we should be in there because we want to have some sway or power or presence. So how do you effectively do that and be fair to everybody? There's other issues. The name of the Red Lake Band, Chippewa, which is a federally recognized term for Ojibwe people. Is the language reflected? And how is the protection of the resources? Do we have a small percentage of people have say over all of the resources? We also have a huge contingent of band members who live off the reservation. Are their voices accurately reflected in this instrument as well? And how do you assure that they have some sort of connection to the Red Lake history, culture, treaties, the land? Because the Anishinaabe, and especially Red Lake, land is our connection, not only to the rest of the universe, but to the Creator and everything. So we are very fortunate to still have a land base and to be able to be in a position that so very many people wish that they still could be in. So the Constitution Initiative began in 2013, and I feel very, very lucky to have been the chairman of the tribe when it started, and to be able to bring the Harvard study to Red Lake and to try to educate a whole nother generation. I encourage all of you to read the Harvard study on economic development in Indian country, and also the Native Nations Institute is doing some great work on constitutional reform throughout the entire country. And a lot of tribes are starting to change their constitutions for the better. And so I will have some questions for you at some point that you can share amongst yourselves and in the community, and then also here at the Red Lake Nation College. I want to thank you for allowing me to share just a little bit about tribal governance and constitutions, and cite some resources and share a little bit of history, and also acknowledge past tribal councils and tribal leaders, especially the ones who were there during the formative years. Peter Graves, Joa Ganashe, Roger Jourdain, Ganu Guanayash, and I want to acknowledge their work as well, because they were there at times throughout our history when transformation and government reform was taking place. Miigwech,